Good evening, everybody, and welcome to part two of the Imperial obituary, the mysterious death of the British Empire. So today I'm joined by Connor. How are you, Connor?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on again.
No worries. And in the first chapter, we covered the introduction of Richard Hilton's book. We covered the first chapter of that book. Um, and we talked about the first chapter was about the British Isles and Britain's relationship and time within Europe. Um, this one, chapter two, we're going to be talking about the race for overseas expansion. So this would basically, I imagine, in my mind, this would cover sort of Tudor England, and then uh, the reign of the Stuarts and so on, and that sort of time period. And Connor will be reading chapter two to us today. And uh, I guess we'll interject if at certain points when interesting points are raised, um, and chat if any people in chat want to join in. I see we've got North Sea here. Welcome, good evening, sir. So if anyone wants to join in, or post a comment or something, um, we can sort of get that up on the screen and have a conversation. So we'll only be covering chapter two tonight. It's quite a long chapter, quite a lot of information in there. We'll do chapter three another possibly next week, or obviously next time. So without further ado, Connor, we'll start with chapter two.
Awesome. Chapter 2: The Race for Overseas Expansion. Almost as soon as Europe began to emerge from the Dark Ages of barbarism which followed the fall of the Roman Empire, rumors were heard of wonderful civilizations somewhere far to the east, sometimes under the name of Cathay or China, and sometimes described as the Indies. Men talked about the fabulous wealth of these distant lands and of the herbs and spices grown there, which could render appetizing the unpalpable European food of those primitive days. These rumors were soon substantiated by samples of these spices, including a new herb called tea, which reached the eastern Mediterranean by camel caravans, either across the Arabian desert or through the wild mountains of Anatolia. At this time, the Republic of Venice had led the known world in maritime trade. Her merchants carried the new tea and other delicious spices by ship from Constantinople or Beirut to western Mediterranean ports, whence the goods penetrated all over Western Europe for those who could afford to buy them. Besides spices, many treasures of art and culture reached the markets of Europe by the long caravan routes across Asia: gold and silver ornaments, rich carpets, and silks.
Okay. So of course, we'll just interject quickly, Connor, so people may be aware. I think he's referring to the Silk Road effectively, from all the way into the Far East into China, all the way to Constantinople. But even from Constantinople across the Balkans into Italy, you had this sort of long network of trade. Um, there had been periods of disruption, but I believe under the Mongol conquest and then the subdivision of the Mongol Empire, sort of time where so you had like the Yan dynasty in China under Kublai Khan, you had the Ilkha Khanate uh, in Iran and modern day Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, that region, and Anatolia. Um, you know, fundamentally, the Mongols would tax those routes, um, and you would have this, this sort of, this constant, this huge trade network across the continent of Asia.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of economics for us in a sort of a historical format. Dan from the Lotus Eaters Cut probably uh, would be more of an expert for us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, someone like that probably would be able to explain. I know that Radlib, Stephen Carlson, he on his channel, he's covered, I believe, this sort of topic before as well. Um, and of course, when Constantinople, you had, of course, you had the bubonic plague and the effects of that. You had the dissolution. Um, you had the dissolution of the Mongol Khanates, which is sometimes overlooked in history, I think. Um, especially the one because of the bubonic plague and various outbreaks, and then the dissolution of the Ilkha Khanate in Persia. It did create a problem where the authority, there was no central authority, and then you had the fracturing into sort of petty states. Um, and then on top of that, a couple centuries later, you had the conquest of of Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks. Um, and as we all know, this was what the sort of catalyst, or the final point in the nail in the coffin for various European traders and adventurers, because a lot of these traders were adventurers themselves, to start thinking about other routes to you know the to the east. And you know as we know with Columbus, it was and many others, that were the idea of going westward, um in westward, sort of um across the Atlantic. I mean, there were some, as we'll find out as well, that took the other idea of going south to the Cape, the African Cape, and going around that way to India, and access the markets from that route. And but I mean, that's that was a too. It was. I mean, it was really too long for any, and too perilous as well. For as journeys go. Um, at this time, anyway.
Yeah, he's setting up the problem, or the sort of the context in which the problem of the cutting off of the silk, or yeah, the trade with China creates,
Mm.
and then to
Yeah, and it's
fix it.
yeah, and you can't really overstate, you know, the I think a lot of historians really fail to really grasp that when at this point the Mongols weren't like the sort of Mongols of Genghis Khan, where they were charging across the. I mean, you still had Mongols like the Golden Horde in what's now modern day Russia, Siberia, and Kazakhstan. But the Mongols of Persia, and the Mongols of China, and the Yan dynasty, especially Kublai Khan, um, I mean, they were taught in the Chinese court, and their empire, because the Yan dynasty what is modern day China, modern day uh, Korea, Mongolia. I mean, it was a huge empire, a vast empire. And recently, they conquered. I think it was the Jin or the Song dynasty. I can't remember. I think it was the might have been the Song dynasty. Come to think of it, and they had this you know uh, uh, the wealth um was for many Europeans at the time was just unimaginable. Um, and also to remember that large parts of, and this was a time where under Kublai's rule, compared to previous Mongol rulers, large parts of China was laid to waste, especially rural China. The death, as we know, everyone knows the Mongol death toll in during their conquests. That the near enough complete genocide of populations. Um, it wasn't really until you had this sort of, I guess it's like third generation Mongol rulers, that they were more, sensible centrist types. um, but yeah, it's, you can't really. uh, the wealth of these people were, exceptional, and it's why a lot of European markets, European traders and venturers were, hell bent on accessing those.
Shall I continue?
Oh yeah, please continue.
In 1295, Marco Polo, a Venetian explorer, returned to his native city with astounding reports of his travels and adventures, which included 20 years of personal service at the court of Kublai Khan, the great emperor of the East. From then onward, a brisk trade sprang up between the emperor's dominions and the two republics of Venice and Genoa, from which most of the Western Europe derived benefit. Besides the overland trade by camel caravans, what is that word? Does also
Hold on a
brought.
sec. Sorry, sorry. Marco per East.
It's
Sorry,
fine. It
I'm trying to find.
doesn't look English.
I think that Dawa. I think that means traders. It's a
Yeah.
term for traders.
So Arab traders also
Yeah.
brought Chinese and Indian merchandise up the Red Sea uh, to Suez, whence camels carried it to Alexandria or Beirut, where it was loaded into Venetian ships. While the huge Mongol empire of Genghis Khan remained strong and united, a remarkable degree of law and order prevailed in Central Asia, so that the trade routes were safe and peaceful. But after the death of Kublai Khan, a grandson of the great Genghis, the empire broke up into warring provinces. The final fatal blows to the Venetian trade, both by the overseas route and by the Red Sea, were the invasions of the Levant by Ottoman Turks, culminating in the capture of Constantinople, the capital of Eastern Christendom. A blanket of fierce religious intolerance replaced the broad-minded protection of trade which had been shown by former rulers of Asia. Europe found herself cut off from the good things of the East just at the time when Europeans had acquired a taste for these luxuries. It's just interesting to me how, I guess, how the events in sort of the Near East, or Anatolia and in Constantinople, is really, cutting things off. It's making things difficult in the Far East. There's this long trade going from China to Europe, but all it takes is one little cut off, and it's broken.
Yeah. I mean, it's also important to note, 'cause at this point we're talking about like the fall of Constantinople. It's the 15th century, right? It's what was
Mhm.
it, 14? Um, uh, I should know this. For like 1450. Maybe someone chat with Kim. I know it's in the 15th century, 1400s.
Mhm.
At this sort of time, uh, the Black Death had come and gone. I mean, population of the population of England, and of course other the rest of Europe had somewhat. I mean, some places had halved, or in England, for example, the population had halved. I mean, you had the entire villages what just literally just wiped out because of the plague. And on the back of that, because of the shortness of labor, you had sort of the rise of skilled labor, and peasants who were able to choose, oh, this lord is offering me better deals to work in this sort of area. And so you had this sort of mobility of people. Um, and naturally, I don't want to sound like some sort of neolib or something, but you had mobility because of that. It also meant the mobility of capital, and ultimately, this resulted in Western Europe and Northern Europe, in particular, at this point, feudalism and the tying of the peasant to the land was just gone. It was effectively abolished. It just wasn't practical anymore. I mean, you did have like a revival in parts of Eastern Europe later on, but it it was gone. And because of this, you had I guess you could say, an emergence of a middle class or mercantile class, skilled class, uh, and in and so I do reckon, the people were pe- people were more, you more people were using sort of these sort of vast trade networks than ever before, and because of the disruption, I guess a greater impact on sort of Western. I mean, we talk about tea, but I mean, also think about, like, this is a time when you had sort of the gunpowder, which came from the East as well, silk, all these sorts of things we have, that people relied on, really effectively was um, cut off, and I do think that. I mean, I don't know of any particular details, but I mean, the trade itself would still continue, but the Muslim nations, especially the Ottomans, who were the emerging power in the East, would most likely, have tariffs on, on these goods, so that to make, because they wouldn't, wouldn't be making sure the um, Christian West would have it easy. Um, and they had on again, off again wars and conflicts with the Christian West as well. Yeah, Con, if you got anything to add?
Nope, I'll just continue. For many
Yeah,
years, learned men had suspected that the world was not flat but global, or globular. Though some still doubted it, this theory encouraged the hope that if the riches of Cathay, or China, and the Indies would no longer be reached by the old routes, they might be reached either around the south of Africa or even by sailing westward. If, as seemed probable, the world was round, one had only to keep going far enough across the Atlantic Ocean to find the eastern shores of China and the Indies. Strong support for this idea
I,
had. Hmm?
I just want to add that Richard Hilton here, and this is probably was popular sort of idea at this time, but during I believe it was the late 19th, early 20th century, there was this concept, um, it was brought up by many people to discredit the sort of Dark Age, Middle Age past. Um, there is no Western groups of people, race of people, civilization that ever thought the world was flat. Everyone throughout history, since ancient times, knew the world was a globe. Because even, I mean, all kings, right? There's a scepter and the orb representing the globe. I mean, even the Pope had in an orb, or he has like a physical representation of Earth, the globe, in part of his regalia. So um, that's a sort of little myth that was developed then, and it's prevalent now as well. But the only people I believe that ever thought the world was flat, ironically, probably would have been the Mongols or people of the steppe, because they had no access to the ocean and they weren't able to develop um, navigating ideas. So, but that's a little misinformation by Richard Hilton there. But sorry, continue, Connor.
Okay. Strong support for this idea had been provided by reports of transatlantic voyages by Norwegians nearly 500 years before the fall of Constantinople made westward exploration a vital matter. People remembered tales of how Eric of Norway and his son Leif Erikson had colonized a northern island called Iceland and had gone further west and found enormous land masses. These might, if seemed, be the northeastern shores of Asia. If fresh transatlantic exploration were to be aimed further south than Iceland, why should not a landfall be made in the Indies themselves? So, similar sort of geographic logic, I guess. This idea stirred the imaginations of geographers and excited the spirit of adventure in seafaring men throughout Europe, but particularly in the countries facing the Atlantic. The mariners of Western Europe quickly perceived that a great opportunity had fallen to them. The merchant fleets of Venice and Genoa were built for the landlocked Mediterranean. Their ships were propelled either by lateen sails, suitable only for running before Mediterranean breezes, or else they were galleons propelled by slaves. But the ships of Western European harbors facing the Atlantic were designed for the open sea. The lost trade of Venice and Genoa seemed ready to fall into the laps of the Atlantic nations. So I mean, it's just sort of it's a supply and demand kind of thing, If the sort of if these Genoese and Venetians can no longer get the goods, somebody else is gonna find the way to get the goods.
Yeah, and yeah, this time Italy was having you had the House of Anjou, and you had the sort of the I think the House of Barcelona. You had all these competing over the Kingdom of Naples in the south, which was very wealthy. You had French incursions by one of the Charleses in the north over Lombardy. You had all sorts of things. You had the Borgia papacy, which was that's another stream in on itself. Um, and so you had all these things going on, and you know, um, the Venetian Republic again was on the is on the in the Adriatic, so they're sort of coned in, and the Genoese were um, just didn't have like Columbus, because of course he's Genoese, right? And the problem is the funds and the what was required just wasn't available, but it was available in the kingdom of Castile, modern day Spain. He was able to gain that sort of that financial access, as you say, and Spain, Portugal, England, um, you know, having relatively a united, not having these, various conflicts, especially England being an island nation, was very much fortunate. I mean, beyond conflict with the Scots, it it was very fortunate they were able to develop these, develop themselves as a nation and build these ocean ships and for
Indeed. Unfortunately, England's rulers were slow to act. The Wars of the Roses that wasted civil war only ended in 1485, and the country still remained in bad shape for foreign enterprises till nearly the end of the century. It was not till 1497 that Sebastian Cabot and his son John, Genoese seamen who lived in Bristol, managed to interest King Henry VII of England in the possibilities of transatlantic exploration. By that time, Portugal, under the inspiring impulse of Prince Henry the Navigator, incidentally half English on his mother's side, had been hard at work exploring the eastward trade, both by the overseas route and by the Red Sea. Were the invasion, or oh, sorry,
I think you
yeah, I
I
just
think you started.
yep.
Yeah.
eastward route to the they had been hard at work exploring the eastward route to India around the southern tip of Africa. Bartholomew Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1487, though he did not at first realize the importance of his discovery. 11 years later, Vasco da Gama, another Portuguese, landed in India itself, and the brief but gallant period of Portuguese colonial predominance began. Spain started in the race much later than her neighbor, owing to the necessity of first conquering Granada, the remnant of 400 years of Moorish occupation. She left the African route to Portugal and concentrated upon trying to reach the Indies by striking due west across the Atlantic. In 1492, the same year that Granada was made Spanish, Christopher Columbus, another Genoese, but in the service of Spain, landed on one of the smallest islands of the Caribbean Sea and went on to discover some large and very fertile lands. He named the first of these Hispaniola, now divided up into Haiti and Santo Domingo, or the Dominican Republic, and the other he called Cuba. The lush tropical fertility of these islands made him think that he had reached the fabulous Spice Islands, so that he chose the name West Indies for the whole archipelago. Though Columbus himself was ungratefully treated, his discoveries were avidly followed up by Spain within a century of his historic discovery. A Spanish colonial empire had been established over the whole of South America, except Brazil and Ghana, over Mexico and Central America, and most of West Indies, and over that part of the western United States where Spanish place names still predominate, namely the states of California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Texas, and Florida. So Spain and Portugal have gotten sort of a early start.
Yeah, I mean, there's the conquistadors. These people, they were. I mean, you had a large portion of them, obviously Spanish, but you had Germans, you had all sorts of mix in these. I wonder if you'll mention Cortez later on, the conquest of the Aztecs. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these people were Spain at this time, and Portugal were highly militarized. They were probably one of the most militarized society in Europe. They had spent what, about 800 years fighting back because of course you had the Visigothic kingdom, and the Visigothic kingdom was near enough completely overrun by Muslims during the 8th century. And so you have about, what is it? So um, you had hundreds of years of Reconquista all the way back to into 1492, when the last Islamic kingdom in Spain was overrun Granada, and the Moors were pushed back to North Africa. But so I guess it's not really surprising that they were able to efficiently assert their both, and the same thing said for the Portuguese, because of course they were spent the centuries recapturing Galicia and modern-day Portugal, Lisbon and stuff, and it's not surprising that they were able to have assert themselves and dominance over many of the crushing the rival native empires, and also dominating over native tribes, and of course spreading the establishing Catholic supremacy over the continent.
Huzzah!
This human sacrifices must stop meme We all know that one.
Yep, that's Catholics love that very much. So we need to end the human
Yes.
sacrifices. Then we did. Then we just started doing it on our own children. Wonderful.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Mod. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Argentine Pope. uh,
I wouldn't say he's really participated in that, but okay.
well.
But okay.
Um. Yeah.
Shall I continue?
So yeah. Yeah. If we continue, yeah, that's sort of.
Okay. Juan de Fuca Strait, where the present Canadian southern frontier touches the Pacific, was discovered in 1592 by an explorer of that name, and so marks the furthest Spanish advance up that coast. Though Spain does not appear to have occupied the land north of the 42nd parallel. In the Pacific Ocean itself, she has possession of the Philippine Islands and laid claims to the Marianas, Pelus, Carolinas, Ladrones, and Bonin archipelagos. Portugal, meanwhile, has established a maritime and mercantile supremacy in the Indian Ocean, and along with both flanks of Africa under her brilliant imperialist Albuquerque. Her fleets even dominated the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. Her trading stations were sprinkled along most shores from Sierra Leone to Timor. In South America, she had established her claim in the enormous land of Brazil, thanks to a papal bull which had divided the whole unexplored world between Spain and Portugal by a north south line down the middle of the Atlantic. As the most eastern part of Brazil protruded to the east of that line, both Iberian kingdoms accepted the fact that Portugal owned that corner of the New World. Indeed, until the great split in Christendom known as the Protestant Reformation, all Christian kings and peoples accepted without question Pope Alexander VI's pronouncement on the ownership of the newly discovered lands in the eyes of devout Christians. Spain and Portugal alone had a divine right to the new lands. This belief, superimposed on the internal troubles of England and France, goes far to explain the long, unchallenged start enjoyed by Spain and Portugal in the race for overseas expansion. Though I'm not really sure.
Now.
I'm not really sure either England or it sounds like England and Spain wouldn't, or not England and Spain, England and France wouldn't have, sort of had the capabilities or the sort of current structure of things. They weren't prepared to do any exploration even during that time.
No, no, absolutely not. There was no, again, at this point, England was sort of going through that period of the Tudor Renaissance period, so it was in its start of its ascendancy. The Plantagenet at this, what, the Plantagenet era had sort of come to an end. You had the Tudors. One thing that I do find interesting though is because this is the Spanish Portuguese treaty that's been referenced here is the Treaty of I think it was Toledo. I think
Yeah,
it's yeah uh
Tortoise something.
Tordesillas, or God knows. Anyway, it was ratified later on. Now, the treaty, which was signed up by the papacy as a papal bull, papal edict. Now, because this was Alexander the Sixth, this is Alexander the Sixth,
Yes.
yeah, which of course is the Borgia Pope, the famous Borgia Pope. Um, I do have to wonder how the Catholic, the Church viewed such treaty afterwards, because I thought a lot of his, you know, edicts passed were sort of overturned because he was, I mean, his reign didn't, his time didn't end in in sort of a peaceful manner. Let's say it wasn't a smooth transition, and a lot of the he was later discredited by I think one of the De La Rovere popes after him, nemesis. So I do wonder, even though the treaty was signed effectively on the books, because the French ultimately would then go into Louisiana, into uh, Canada, and parts of the West Indies. So obviously there were like Catholics who didn't really listen to the edict. If that makes sense. They didn't really. There wasn't the Catholics. France didn't really listen.
I mean, I think it more has to do with, of course, Alexander the Sixth was not a very moral pope. Nobody really considered him that. He's very well known for, uh, being a bad pope in those types of ways. But I don't necessarily think France is going against that agreement so much, because they weren't really taking land. They weren't getting in the way of Spain's uh, conquests or anything like that. It
Well, no, I just mean on the claim, because the claim is, if you look at the parallel line, I'm just looking at it, and technically, like the whole of North America is basically claimed by Spain at this like was it what year would 1494, or at this particular time, it's effectively all this land is just claimed by Spain,
yeah,
and
but
then in the south
nobody
it's
nobody knew what land was to the north of what they had found. They didn't really know
well,
North
yeah,
America very
but
well at all. So I would say that it's like, because if you kept going past that line, it's a globe, so you just get to the other side, and eventually they be they'd run into each other, and then you'd be like, okay, well, how do you divide that up? But my point is, it's not as concrete. It's more like, this is where Portugal's stuff begins and ends. This is where Spain is, and let's be I guess let's not get in each other's ways. I think that's more along the lines of
oh, so
the
Spain and
situation.
Portugal don't go to war in the New World over
Well, yeah,
like
if
territory and land.
because
Yeah.
France isn't really a part of it. Alexander the Sixth is only taking in consideration the fact that Portugal and Spain are the only ones really participating. France hasn't gotten, France is too busy fighting the 100 Years' War, or while then they're too busy fighting religious civil wars. The French are in chaos.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I would say in this though is that again at this particular time, Pope Alexander here. I mean, he's of Catalan origin. His entire family are from Catalan. He has close ties with the uh, monarchy there, and the Castile, the Spanish monarchy. Um, can he be a neutral arbiter in this? Because I imagine the Portuguese probably weren't particularly happy about you about like, because it does seem Spain gets like the better half of the deal.
Yeah, he was certainly not a neutral arbiter, but that's just how things go occasionally. Can you really be a neutral arbiter? Like, I
Well, no, I mean the problem is I understand he's not seen as the best pope. I would say though, like when I've read up about the Borgia popes and the Borgias and everything, a great deal of information, like like his son Cesare and daughter Lucrezia Borgia. I mean, there's always that thing about there was incest. It was all like Game of Thrones and everything. And a lot of the things that was said about them, it was made up. Effectively, it was heavily made up by um, the Orsini sort of clan, which were rivals in the College of Cardinals. Other the Orsini cardinal. And the trouble is, cardinals back then, especially Italian cardinals, were pretty much like gangsters. They hated the idea of a non-Italian pope.
Well, remember, I mean,
And
this is a pope with kids. That's he. There was like he was corruption. He, from what I understand, he did buy his way onto the papacy. So I'm not sure if that's true, but the point is that he's definitely not a image. He's not the image of a good pope to anybody.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I yeah, true. I understand what you're saying. It's just that you know, the Sforza and the Della Rovere family were also, the thing there is, they were the biggest detractors of the Borgia papacy, but
Mm-hmm.
they also were like, they also had like clandestine, relatives, alleged offspring.
Sure.
I think what made him really unpopular was he actually recognized Juan, Borgia, and Cesare and Lucrezia as his children. A lot of other, in that time, there wouldn't be that recognition. They'd be given like education, maybe even some sort of title, and you would know, like people would they would know, but you wouldn't actually know, like because at that time it was very, if you were like say a bastard, and your father who was maybe had like a nobility or a position in the church which was effectively like a nobility itself, and he recognized you, that was it was quite rare. The only other example that I can really think which was an exception to the rule was William the Conqueror, because he was a bastard, and he inherited the duchy. I mean, it was a very unheard of, near enough.
And then he became king of England.
And yeah, but the thing, there was a lot of the Norman, his extended family, cousins and Normans uh, in the duchy refused to recognize it. I mean, he had to survive multiple attempts on his life because of his, and then he had to learn from a young age to become a warrior and fight. And I mean, Cesare Borgia was definitely much a warrior as well. Same thing. So continue. Let's not talk about the Borgias. I can talk about them for.
Yes. Even though the Cabots eventually succeeded by their own enthusiasm in persuading Henry VII of England to finance their transatlantic ventures, English interest in the bleak northern shores of Labrador and Hudson Bay remained dormant for many years. Henry VIII, who succeeded his father in 1509, was too busy engaged with his own matrimonial problems, with his quarrel with the Pope, with his resultant suppression of the English monasteries, and with confiscation of church property, to have much time for overseas exploration. His religious policies were by no means popular with large numbers of his subjects, particularly in the north, whence a serious gesture of public protest known as the Pilgrimage of Grace marched upon London and was suppressed by the king with unscrupulous deceit and severity. So yeah, England is not in any situation to deal with colonizing or empire.
Well, no, I mean, I'd also say Henry VIII, and he has some interesting qualities about him. um, he had some interesting sort of takes, and I tell you what, if you ever want to have a good laugh, there are letters between him and the Pope, and some of but this is before the divorce of Catherine Aragon, and
Mm-hmm.
there's one letter to the Pope where he's meant to be talking about ways about like because of course he did like a whole dissertation on condemning Lutheran Martin
Yeah.
Luther. And if you actually read it from a Catholic point of view, I mean, it's pretty like spot on. You can't really fault his logic and position on that.
He was smart. It's not like he wasn't smart.
Yeah, and he knew he was a really good theologian. Because he was taught. He wasn't really meant to. Remember, he wasn't meant to be king. It was his older brother,
Arthur,
Arthur, who died. And
you
but
almost said
I
King
one of the
Arthur.
letters. I know, such a shame. I know one of the letters he was writing to to the Pope, he was meant to be like talking about Lutheranism and the corruption of the church. But he ended up talking about like slippers and how he liked like comfy slippers or something like that. It was really. I just imagined it like the Pope, like someone in the court who translating it, and he was like, he's talking about slippers. What's this about?
Well, actually,
So
why would there even be translations? Was it written in English? I'm surprised it's not
oh no,
written
you
in,
probably
I'm surprised it's not written in Latin or something.
I'm just guessing. It would have either been, I reckon it probably been either Latin or it may have been French. If it
That
was
could have been it too.
French, if it's French, I reckon the Pope would have understood it, because I think it was a French Pope at the time as well. So possibly it
I mean,
may have been French.
clerics probably knew a number of languages at that point.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. Well, they would have to, wouldn't they? To especially Latin, but yeah, I mean, also to remember that Henry VIII was known, especially when he was as a younger king before the English Reformation, he would he would host lavish and very expensive parties. I believe he was also um, instrumental in the creation of a navy which was planning on a war with France. So he would spend money like no other king before.
That's
Um,
why they didn't have any money at the end.
well, yes, and uh, I do. One thing I've always wondered with the Reformation in England, because it, unlike the other the sort of Lutheran Reformations in Germany and in the sort of Calvinist movement, Switzerland and Scandinavia and everything, and in Scotland in particular, it wasn't so much of a theological dispute. It was just basically like an authority dispute, and so he wasn't against Catholic teachings. It was basically, well, effectively it was like a schism, wasn't it, within the Catholic Church? It was no, I'm uh you know it's, and so for him, he was never, even when he, after the confiscation of the properties and the destruction of monasteries, he never was a Protestant in what we would define as a Protestant would be.
Yeah, until Edward, his son, came to the throne, you really wouldn't be able to tell much of a difference from the church the church in England versus the rest of the Catholic world.
Yeah, I
And
mean, his final wife, I think it was Lady, what was it,
Catherine
Lady Jane
Parr.
Grey?
No,
Oh,
Catherine Parr
Catherine, sorry,
was
Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr, even. Sorry, that's what yeah, Catherine Parr. She was a very hard, Protestant. Um,
she was indeed.
and he had regular arguments with her. I think one of them was actually over the translation of the Bible.
I'm
He
I-
wasn't.
I'm just surprised one of them wasn't I can kill you, you know. And then she'd be like, "Well then do it." If only that's how things had gone.
Yeah, I mean, I remember at this point in Henry VIII's life, he was quite bloated and sort of a bit loopy.
Oh,
So
disgusting.
yeah, um,
Iron Duke's making good point in the chat. I don't know if you want to bring that up.
yeah. So one of the arguments now, there are several people who believe that he may have like suffered brain damage,
Yeah.
may have even like developed some like mental health sort of something wrong, because there was an incident where he was badly wounded after a joust, and there was he was, I think it wasn't sure if he would actually recover, but he did. But after that, that's when the erratic behavior, let's say, begun. um,
It does seem like
yes,
that may be very possible that he had some head injury.
yeah, because I mean, I mean, like the example I used, the letter. I mean, I know that happened because the head injury. I think what happened when he was before his divorce. So his first divorce, let's say. So yeah, and
I
I think
still
that was on
stand.
the. What was that on the?
I still stand by.
Oh, what?
He never existed. Never. He never divorced his first wife. Never happened. Even he didn't.
Well, actually,
Even he says that he didn't marry the second one.
well, I mean, technically, it was an annulment. The first wife, wasn't it? It wasn't actually a divorce as such. It was more of an annulment.
Well, you could say that it was an annulment, though. It had been from a Catholic perspective, it would not be an annulment because it was the marriage was granted by the Pope, so the Pope would have been the only cleric who could have annulled that marriage. From a
Yeah, and
Catholic
that leads to the other. Well, yeah, but also that leads to the other problem is that if I remember correctly, he originally he wasn't really allowed to marry Catherine because she was already married to Prince Arthur. So technically, she was his legal sister.
Well, yeah, it was. I mean, there's debates over it, but there are two biblical. I think Leviticus and Deuteronomy contradict themselves, or have there's some ambiguity there, and also Catherine of Aragon. It never, according to her and others, she never consummated the marriage, so that it was just granted as a dispensation from the Pope to marry
Oh yeah,
Henry.
that was made up. That was made up. I don't believe that for a second.
I don't know. He was pretty
But
sickly at the time when they were married. I do believe it, but okay. I mean, her Catherine of
well,
Aragon was never. She always seemed to be a virtuous woman in her life. I don't know of anything that contradicts
I
that.
mean, I mean the thing there is, did she submit herself for an examination by doctors? Do we know of that?
Well, how could
Because
she
I'm
do?
just trying to remember.
How could I mean? She couldn't do that post hoc.
I mean,
She
you can
she would.
tell, but
No, I know. I'm
uh,
saying she would have had to do that in the first, like at the first time. I don't know if she was examined during, like in
oh, yeah,
between
yeah, I see what.
marriage.
Yeah, I
Like,
see what you mean. It is the only reason. The only reason I asked is because it was quite common of in especially European monarchies, especially the you know, kings and queens or princes and stuff. Upon marriage, that there would be an observation during the wedding night, let's say, to make sure that there is the line of succession is continued.
yeah, no,
The
I get
house is secure.
yeah, I get what you mean. I don't know what
Yeah,
happened with that. I just know that Arthur, from my understanding, was very sick when he married her. So
yeah,
I don't know if if he would have been able to at that time.
yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah,
I mean, he was near death. I mean,
I know.
he was basically dying.
Yeah, I mean, I know Henry VIII. He basically said, "Oh yeah, nothing happened." So it could be an all. That I can marry Catherine.
Well,
Um,
yeah, he was the one who was like, "I want to marry her."
yeah, and I think he was the idea that suggested in the annulment, because you have to remember if she couldn't marry him, the alliance between Spain and England also couldn't go ahead, and so you have to remember there was a lot of political not there was a lot of political pressure at that marriage or that alliance to remain, especially with
Sure.
France because the wars with warring with France was still on the air, so
Iron Duke's encouraging us right now to get back
to
to
to continue. Yeah, because at this rate, it's going to be like 25 episodes.
yeah. uh, and every time, yeah. Okay, so do you want me to continue?
Yeah, continue. If you want me to take over, what page are we on again? Is it 19?
19, yeah. I'm good. I can
Okay.
continue if you want me to.
So I'm gonna let you like really blast this one out and get through the pages
Okay.
and less interruption. Yeah.
Neither king nor people, in fact, were sufficiently free from domestic disturbance to enter the race for lands abroad. An important effect of the Protestant Reformation was, however, very slowly manifesting itself in countries where the mental discipline of the Roman Church was losing its hold on certain Christians. In England, particularly among the seafaring folk of Devon, respect for Alexander VI's famous bull giving colonizing monopoly to Spain and Portugal rapidly diminished. Men like Sir Humphrey Gibbert, uh, Hawkins, Frobisher, Drake, and Raleigh dared to question the right of the Bishop of Rome to parcel out the world to two Romish kingdoms or derive England sailors, deprive English sailors of the freedom to explore. But these men of independent thought were in advance of their times, even when the spread of Protestant thought had rendered Pope Alexander's decree a dead letter. In the mind of Protestants, there were still lingering an unwillingness to flaunt the might of Spain too openly, for Spain was still the world's most powerful nation and continued to be formidable even after the defeat of her armada. For these reasons, when English ships first began to trespass on alleged preserves of Spain and Portugal, these forays were for a long time conducted as a form of private enterprise by a few bold spirits, often financing their expeditions out of their own pocket. Their voyages were disowned and even condemned officially by authorities of England, though secretly admired, encouraged, and sometimes rewarded. For many years, these English adventures were limited to exploratory voyages, illegal in Spain's eyes, designed mainly to discover a west about sea route to India. Raids on Spanish harbors and seizures of treasure ships closely resembled piracy were undertaken as a sideline to exploration. Drake's greatest exploit, the circumnavigation of the world, was outstanding example of this undeclared Cold War at sea. The West Indies became a favorite hunting ground for semi-piratical ships of many nations, English, Dutch, and Huguenots, French in the main, who harried the Spanish treasure fleets carrying gold and silver from Mexico and beyond. But in all
Yes.
these, oh, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. And I mean, yeah, of course, Sir Francis Drake, the raiding of after the Armada, especially because of course Sir Francis Drake was the first person to successfully circumnavigate the world. I know people like to say Magellan, but he died en route, and that doesn't count. Okay, he died en route, so he didn't circumnavigate. His body circumnavigated the world. Doesn't really count.
Well, but who wasn't there
His
someone else
rotting
there?
his rotting corpse. Well, yeah, but they don't count. You know, they just sort of they were like all starved and half dead anyway, so it didn't really count. Um, Sir Francis Drake, and his men, the Golden Hind, successfully circumnavigated the world. But by doing so, what they would do was they would raid. They when they were the circumnavigation was sort of playing by ear near enough, because they would raid the West Indies, but also, I mean, they went along the coast, um, around the southern tip of South America, and I think they raided up through Mon Chile and Colombia, and they went up all the way to avoid Spanish ships which were on pursuit to California, and Sir Francis Drake landed somewhere, I think, in Northern California, because he was hoping to get from California to find a river network to get through into Canada, the Hudson Bay area. Of course, no route exists at all, but he didn't know that. He was sort of just hoping. He made contact with some of the tribes there, native tribes, and then afterwards they sailed across to I believe to the Philippines and then Malaysia, and they had to dump a lot. I remember they had to dump. I think it was in Malaysia. They had to dump a lot of the loot, because they got their ship was pretty much weighed down because of all the silver and gold, particularly silver. But please continue. Yes.
Okay. Where was I? Oh, but in all these maritime enterprises, scarcely any attempt was made for a long time to annex overseas territory or to colonize it. The buccaneers who preyed upon the Spanish treasure traffic used often to seize some small West Indian island and made it their temporary base while careening the hulls of their ships. But in this, there was no question of national sovereignty. When at length Englishmen became emboldened to take this further step in challenging the claims of Spain, they selected for their first colonial experiment a part of North American coast well clear of all these regions occupied by Spain. They first attempt the very first attempt at colonialization was sponsored by Sir Walter Raleigh in 1585. He chose the Atlantic coast between Florida, where Spaniards were already established, and the bleak, iceberg-infested shores of the far north. He named the new country Virginia in honor of Queen Elizabeth, though in fact his first settlement was planted on Roanoke Island off of North Carolina coast. His first attempt ended in failure, and it was not till early in the 17th century that permanent English communities took root along the Atlantic coast between Georgia and Maine. So my kind of point about them, sort of not taking land or not setting up shop right, in the way of Spain, or not trying to get in their way, kind of, in my opinion, kind of holds there.
I mean, one thing I would say is that during the first year of the Jamestown colony, so the first colony in that was successful, let's say, but in the first year they had a really bad sort of winter, because of what was it? Uh, Indian raids, but also lack of food, crop failure. There was even reports of cannibalism. So it was sort of becoming like near enough like a failed project. But what sort of got it round was, and I think it was Sir Walter Raleigh who turned up with looted tobacco seeds. And what made that unique was Spain declared, I think they declared a monopoly on the tobacco trade, on tobacco seeds. So for the English to swipe seeds and start growing it in Virginia, and then later, in other parts when you had the spread in Georgia as well, that was, that could have been a very major diplomatic incident with Spain.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, for even further north you go, like I think you'll get onto the Plymouth colonies up in Massachusetts and in or Pennsylvania and places like that. It wasn't, the environment wasn't there for growing tobacco, but yeah, I mean, it's I'm actually will get on talking about what happened up there.
The slow growth of these early settlements into the 13 colonies who broke away will be studied in the next chapter. In extenuation of this slowness, it should be remembered that during this critical 17th century, England suffered civil war for 9 years and a totalitarian dictatorship for 9 more. London was ravaged by plague and a disastrous fire. The wonder is that any progress at all was made in New England and Virginia during such a troubled period. Simultaneously with the semi-piratical or pure piratical exploits of Drake
Yeah,
and
piratical
Hawkins.
pirates.
Yeah, no, yeah, I get where that's going. Pirates.
Yeah,
Hawkins on Drake and Hawkins on the Spanish Main. Other Englishmen persisted in their dream of finding a northwest passage or sea route round the top of the American continent to China and the Indies. In 1576, Sir Humphrey Gilbert, a Devon squire, wrote a book called A Discourse to Prove a Passage by the Northwest to China and the East Indies. Inspired by this book, Martin Frobisher, another Devon man, persuaded Queen Elizabeth to grant him license to seek for the supposed passage. He brought back samples of mineral ore, but it proved worthless and interest waned. Gilbert persisted, and in 1583, he personally led 5 ships to Hudson Bay to continue Frobisher's probe. Gilbert spent his private fortune on the expeditions and himself sailed in the smallest ship, the Squirrel, of only 10 tons. She was lost with all hands on the return passage. Only the Golden Hind reached home.
yeah.
Or do you? I thought you were gonna say something. Or okay, I'll continue. However, belief in the Northwest Passage was strengthened by the Golden Hind's reports of the very vastness of the Hudson Inlet. It was well known too that a little farther to the south, the French had begun penetrating the continental deeply along a large estuary called the
estuary, yeah.
Estuary called the Saint Lawrence. The French appear to have been considerably more impressed by the exploration of the 2 Cabots than was the country for whose benefit the voyages were made. In 1534, about a generation after the Cabots, Jacques Cartier led a French expedition which discovered the mouth of the St. Lawrence River and penetrated up it for some distance. Wherever he landed, he planted the French flag and claimed the country for his king. Next year, he returned and reached a large Indian village named Hochelaga, near which he built a fort and named it Mount Royal. Mont Royal. A name later contracted into Montreal. The Indians gave him a friendly reception, but he stupidly antagonized them by carrying off their king. Okay, that's just hilarious. Sorry, bros, we're taking your king.
Trust me, God. This is the problem with the French. They got so used to kidnapping as like political tactics that they just implemented it. We just can't take because getting hostages in Europe was a common form of like diplomacy. Like everyone, oh yeah, you're a hostage in the court or something. I mean, not like he'd be treated badly or anything, but yeah, they kidnapped a king.
It's just hilarious. Bold move.
So typical French though.
Bold move, French.
It's so typical.
Yeah,
it's so typical of them.
I just love how they were friendly. It wasn't like the Indians did anything bad to them. It was just like he was like, "Oh, I'm getting a little too ahead of myself. I'm gonna kidnap your king."
One thing, and mediocre, the unremarkable in chat just says you do have to admire the ambition to seek Northwest Passage, but it must have been horrendous to do so. So yeah, I mean the thing though is you had at that time it could only be done in the summer and months, because every other time you would have had, in the winter it would all be frozen over up in the Hudson Bay region anyway. And because of the obsession of, I guess, because the certainty of these English explorers, these Devonshire men, I mean, unfortunately, they even wrote a book, and it's, they were proven obviously to be wrong. So that's a massive L on their part. I mean, unfortunately. But in doing so, because of the certainty of discovering that precious route, the French were able to have a really good starting position in the New World. Because if you think about it, from effectively, Newfoundland, Quebec, I mean, all the lands, adjacent land along the St. Lawrence, all the way down to what's now modern day Michigan, Ohio Valley, and then down the Mississippi all the way to Louisiana. I mean, we've all seen maps of New France. I mean, I think people in chat, and Connie, you know the map of New France at its height. The French were able to dominate, on paper, anyway, the map. But in reality, that vast territory, especially of the Louisiana Purchase, um, the French were pretty much only populated in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and uh, you know obviously Quebec and Montreal up there. But in between, you had your odd string of forts and maybe traders like fur. I mean, it was dominated by fur traders. It wasn't like it was populated.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
they didn't really turn it into a colony the way we think of what a colony might be in the English sense.
no, I mean, have you seen that film? It was at DiCaprio like a few years ago, Revenant. You've seen that one?
I haven't.
Um, I think it's set in the 18 uh um it's a bit unclear. I think I think it's like the early eight it's before the 1812 war, I think. It's like early 1800s, right? So because the French are still present in the Americas, right? So
I didn't
I
I
would
didn't
have
even know
assumed.
that was a historical film. I thought that was just the ads don't make me think it's a historical film.
Yeah, I think it's set like in when was the Louisiana Purchase again? Or was it 1805
No,
or something?
5, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so it probably is set. Must be set just before that, because because of the muskets. So I mean, in that it basically shows, uh the forts along the Mississippi. The whole thing was just fur traders, beaver furs, pelts, whatever, bear skin, whatever what that they could get. These were the people who were the Westerners out there on that, and also natives as well. So, or some friendly native tribes. Not all of them were friendly to the West, but
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I
So
I
it
wanna
could,
see I wanna see a movie about, this guy coming to, coming and kidnapping this Indian king, because 'cause that'd be kinda funny.
yeah,
It should be a comedy too.
that I mean, that sounds hilarious.
It just
Just
sounds so funny.
the way that Richard Hilton just describes it, saying, "Oh yeah, he just came in and like they were friendly to him, and what did he do in return? He just kidnapped the king."
Yeah, and he doesn't even
Okay.
say kidnapped. Richard Hilton doesn't even say. He just says carried off their king. It's like, okay. Okay, well, I'll continue. Consequently,
Yeah.
when he made a third voyage in 1541 with 5 ships carrying settlers, he found the Indians hostile. Shocking! You kidnapped their king. So he
Why would
dropped.
they do this?
Yeah, well, what? This is terrible. How this? I could never see this coming. So he dropped downstream again to a broad reach overlooked by an imposing cliff, which he said to have earned his men to acclaim in admiration Quebec, thus given thus giving name to the present great city and province. Near here, he built another fort, which he named Charlesburg, just as Gilbert and other Englishmen fondly hoped that the great uh, inlet of Hudson Bay was going to take them right through to the Pacific. So Cartier and later French explorers imagined that that the Great St. Lawrence estuary and its vast lakes were going to provide them with the desired northwest passage to China. In actual fact, as can be can be seen on a modern map, this inland waterway took them not due west but southwest, so that the French exploration and settlement curled round the western hinterland of the English colonies of New England and Virginia. How this clash of interests was sorted out will be studied in the next chapter. Meanwhile, in the East, the same Protestants' loss of respect for Pope Alexander's bull was encouraging English, Dutch, and Danish merchants to challenge Portuguese monopoly of Indian trade. Chartered companies began to be formed by city merchants of London, Amsterdam, and Copenhagen to exploit the opportunities opened up by flouting uh, the papally granted monopoly of the London companies. One undertook the development of Virginia, while a Plymouth company handled that of New England. But of these chartered companies, by far the most famous was the Honorable Company of the Merchants of London, trading to the East Indies, began known as the East India Company. Its charter was granted by Queen Elizabeth on the last day of 1559. Shall I continue, or do you have anything to say?
Yeah, 1599. So yeah, the East India Company, of course, as people would know, it would start off as just a company, and it would evolve nearly into a state, effectively into a state. It controlled towards its end. It was absorbed. It was sort of bought by the British state. I believe it was in 1858 after the Indian Mutiny, but by that time it was under the um, it's evolved into basically just the dominant power state in the Indian subcontinent. Uh, it had control over vast territory. It had treaties of many Maharajas, and they ended up defeating the Sikh Empire, the Mughal Empire, smashing up the Martha Confederacy. So yeah, I mean, but at this time they were just just really like a very humble company. Probably only didn't really have any like military power. It was just like maybe a few guards, but their power was in trade. And of course, the trade that they would give. I think I used this as the East Indies Company. The thumbnail to this video is a representation of that. And one thing they would give to the Martha Confederacy, the Mughals, was of course the cannon and the musket. So that was our contract. That was what they wanted to fight, and there were several conflicts during our at this period in India. So definitely helped matters.
I think I should just read the rest, and then we can talk about the rest. Does that sound good to you?
Yes, certainly. Go ahead.
Okay. At at first, this organization and its Dutch and Danish rivals were interested solely in trade. The Great Spice Islands of Java and Sumatra, rather than the Indian continent itself, were the major attraction, particularly for the Dutch. For some years, the Portuguese, jealous in defense of their monopoly, were regarded by the North European interlopers as the only enemy. But as the power of the Portuguese waned before the growing aggressiveness of the Dutch, these latter showed an increasing resentment against sharing the spice trade with the English. Fighting broke out between the ships of the two nations, culminating in the torture and judicial murder of some English traders by the Dutch governor in the island of Amboina. From then onward, The English company transferred its interest to India itself, leaving the East Indian islands to the Dutch. It has been falsely reported by some historians that the English abandoned their activities in the Spice Islands as a direct result of this Dutch outrage, thus implying some degree of timidity to our forefathers. Actually, it was no case of cause and effect at all, but merely a coincidence in timing. By now, Oriental prices were ceasing to be a novelty in markets of Europe, owing to a rupture of the Portuguese monopoly and the large fleets of Dutch merchant ships engaged in the trade. Spices no longer fetched the high prices of a century back. There were something approaching a glint on the price on the spice market. On the other hand, English merchants were starting to take a keen interest in the possibilities of India itself for several reasons. An English Jesuit, Stevens, who had lived in Goa for some years, sent home glowing reports about the magnificence of the uh, Mughal emperor's court in Delhi and of the wealth which merchants of Portugal were acquiring by trade with India. He was by no means the first source of intelligence on the subject. As far back as the reign of Henry VIII, a Venetian ship was wrecked on the island of Wight. Sir William Monson, seeing the priceless cargo brought ashore, was so incensed that this rich carrying trade should be carried only in foreign ships that he founded a chartered company, one of the earliest of its kind, to capture some of this trade from the ship owners of Venice. His company was called the Turkey Merchants because their plan was to simply to ship Indian goods from Beirut or Alexandria, as the Venetians had been doing for years. It it was not long before the more ambitious idea was born of fetching the goods all the way from India by English ships so as to secure not merely a part but all the profits of carrying trade. It was comparatively easy for Englishmen to travel to India long before any English ships touched there, but they had to go either in Portuguese ships, as Stevens did, or overland through Russia and Persia to the Persian Gulf. Many merchants, in fact, did this for the purpose of buying for the English market, but it was galling to English pride and business instincts to to be forced to hire the goods in foreign ships. Transport overland up the Volga was tried, but the cost was prohibitive. Hence came the various attempts to find alternative sea routes by the Northwest Passage over Canada or by the Northeast Passage over the top of Russia. The routes around the Cape of Good Hope and the one taken by Drake through Magellan's Straits were at first deemed unsuitable for for large-scale passage of English trade on account of the lingering unwillingness to flout the Iberian kingdoms too openly. Stevens' promising reports were substantiated by a party of 4 travelers: Storsey, Newbury, Leeds, and Ralph Furch, who between them taught English merchants more about India than they had learned from uh, an earlier source. Story remained as a monk in Goa. Newbury died on the way home. Leeds, a jeweler, took service under the Mughal Emperor Akbar the Great. Filch stayed aboard for 8 years and performed journeys to almost every corner of the Indian peninsula, journeys which rivaled the exploits of Marco Polo, though not so widely known. All these 4, as well as Stevens, contributed by their letters a growing volume of commercial intelligence for the City of London. It was these reports, coupled with the recognition of the fact that there existed no alternative sea route to the one round the Cape of Good Hope, which led to the formation of the East Indian Company. Captain Cavendish, who in 1586 to 1588 repeated Drake's tour of the world, convinced the city merchants that in the view of the hostility of Spain and Portugal, the only way by which the Indian trade would be tapped by English ships would be by armed ships sailing in large convoys. It was no work for small firms with solitary ships, hence the need for a chartered company. To understand what happened during these early years of European rivalry, we must remember that the morals of the sea were still somewhat primitive. The distinction between piracy and lawful occasions were blurred in the minds of quite worthy and respectable seafarers. The uh, the convenient practice of forcibly buying and selling was not considered wrong. It was if a well-armed ship met a weaker one, her captain thought nothing of persuading the weaker one to exchange cargoes, perhaps with monetary consideration. The terms of the deal was often dictated by the better armed merchant ship. They were now degrees of honesty. There were degrees of honesty and scruple among merchants, seamen, colonial administrators, and others, and now one bad case was publicized and remembered when 100 good men were forgotten. So it came about that an outrage such as that of the Dutch governor against some English traders in Aboyna was magnified into a typical example of Dutch conduct. The same was true. Hmm?
Is it all right if I? 'Cause we are coming towards the end of the chat. We've
Yeah,
got only about another page and a bit. Is it right if I just interject there because um it's just covered the whole quite important bit. So at this time, you had like these individual explorers, as we made like Finch and Leeds and stuff, and they were very much um uh, because of there was no passage had been discovered in northern Canada. There was, I think, at this particular time, you had the sort of doubt setting in with some that there may not be a route round in the New World. And as I think it was Cavendish pointed out, his final analysis on this, that yeah, the only route round is through the Cape, which means you're going to have to incur on Spanish and Portuguese territory, let's say naval territory. And the thing there is, I guess the reason why the British was trying to avoid that was not just the obviously military one, but it means that various trading ships would have to um uh they wouldn't be able to conduct themselves uh as merchant ships alone. They would need to have almost like a fleet or warship, you know ships to sort of guard their trading routes. And that is another added problem because that I guess that you're testing the capabilities of Britain in doing that. Um, so it is quite interesting that they did try and find every possible route around that. Because I mean, even after the Armada, um, Spain was still Spain was the most powerful nation in the world by far at that moment in time.
Indeed. Shall I continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
Where did I leave off?
So magnified into typical example of Dutch conduct.
Is that page 23?
24.
Or 24?
24. Yeah. It's the
Oh.
second paragraph, I guess.
The same was true of the piratical crews of two English ships, the Tiger and the Tiger's Whelp, under Sir Edward Merchelborne, a man.
Mitchell. Mitchell-born, yeah.
Mitchell-born, a man appointed by King James I despite protests by the East Indian Company, who had already declined his services. This expedition prowled the China Sea for some time, causing havoc among peaceful Chinese junks, with the result that the reputation of Englishmen were blackened throughout the Far East for many years. Oof, that's unfortunate.
Based.
Eh,
Based. Uh,
As a result of the official antagonism of the Spanish and Portuguese authorities towards interloping ships from the Protestant nations, it followed that armed merchant ships of these interlopers soon began to consider any Spanish or Portuguese ship fair game. It was not long before this lucrative custom encouraged English ships to attack Dutch traders and vice versa. Even though they're both. Oh, yeah, never mind. That's kind of funny. Even though they're both Protestants, they're both fighting each other.
yeah, I mean, I would say, that there wasn't the unity in the Protestant Europe at that time um wasn't as wasn't as united as you would think.
Yeah, I'm not really sure
And
there was ever really unity in the Protestant amongst Protestants in England, in
I
Europe.
mean, there wasn't much unity in the Catholic in the Catholic world either. But no,
Yeah,
there wasn't unity. I would say
I meant just on the
I
seas.
would
Yeah,
say this. Yeah, I mean, I would say maybe the Scandinavian, the Lutherans, but even then you had various wars of successions after the, you know, the Danish control. Like Norway went between Denmark and the Swedish crown several times. So yeah, that not there wasn't really much. I wouldn't say there was much unity in that way, but yeah.
also, I just mean along the lines of Protestants, from one Protestant group to another, there tends to be disagreements, um, theologically as well,
Yeah,
uh, not just politically.
yeah. I mean, yeah, and also you have to remember that even before the Reformation, there was you had the Hanseatic League, which was a trading uh, collective of various states, cities, or various cities, and um, like imperial free cities in the Holy Roman Empire, and all the way to Novgorod in Russia. And I believe much of the sort of Dutch cities were involved with that as well. And there were many Dutch merchants who lived in England. And I mean, during the uh, what was it, the peasants' revolt, Dutch merchants were targeted because they were very much hated, because they of, I guess, viewed of their unscrupulous stuff. So it sort of transcends like religious, what you would maybe think of like a religious unity that there was, or religion itself. It was actually probably more of an ethnic sort of deep-rooted ethnic sort of grievance,
Yeah, I
in
mean, but it
some
doesn't say
regards.
anything about the Portuguese fighting the Spanish over this type of thing.
No, I mean the only thing is that what the Spanish, there was a point where where again at this sort of time period where Spain did inherit there was like a union of the crowns between Portugal and Spain. Of course, that didn't last very long, but
Yeah, it didn't pan out.
um, no, but again, yeah, Britain's oldest ally, again, or England's oldest ally later Britain, is of course
Portugal.
is
Yeah.
Portugal. I mean, we
Yep.
yeah, we have an alliance that goes back to um what was it, like the 12th century or something? So
That's why they joined World War One for some reason.
yeah, and it was invoked during the Napoleonic Wars as well. We promised, we sent Wellington down there, and
Yeah,
sorry,
true.
America, you're not our oldest ally. uh,
Hey, we're a part. We were a part of you at one point, so I'm not. I'm not sure how that works.
and I know the best. literally the best years of America of like being an American is like literally when it's part of the 13 colonies, and then it was all downhill afterwards.
Okay. Shall I continue?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It is instructive at this point to note the differences of incentive that were spurring on the various nations of Europe to spread their activities overseas. Spanish and Portuguese expansion was primarily based on a religious motive, having fought the Moors for 4 centuries and at last evicted them from the peninsula. Those two nations naturally guarded themselves as champions of Christendom against all comers. The discovery of distant lands whose peoples were not even Muslim but pagans stirred the crusading ardor of kings and clergy profoundly. Missionary ardor was given an additional impotence by knowledge of the immense wealth to be won by conquest of these heathen lands. Consequently, in both of these cases, overseas enterprise was regarded and conducted as an expansion or extension of the long religious war. Private enterprise scarcely came into it. The state and church controlled all operations and pocketed most of the gains, both for religious and mercenary reasons. For the intrusion of the heretical, both the religious and mercenary reasons for the intrusion of heretical commerce rivals was bitterly resented and fiercely opposed. With England and Holland, however, the incentives towards overseas enterprise were almost entirely commercial, and in both cases, the initiative was provided mainly by private enterprise. As soon as the pace of rivalry between the two uh, acute for small men to complete, the answer was the formation of big chartered companies by the merchants of London and Amsterdam. In neither case did the respective monarchs or governments do much more than register mild interest. But there quickly arose a difference between the actual policies adopted for further overseas trade. The Dutch had hardly ousted the Portuguese from Malacca, Ceylon, and other places when they came to the conclusion that it was necessary to conquer and rule the eastern markets in order to ensure them for Holland. The English, on the other hand, definitely rejected the idea of saddling themselves with the responsibility of government. Their sole wish at first was to trade, and they persisted in this policy till absolutely forced by historical evolution to assume responsibility for government. This divergence of outlook was largely due to the conditions which the Europeans found in their respective spheres of development. In the East Indies, the Dutch had to deal with numerous small rulers in an archipelago of thousand islands, large and small, with populations some civilized and others very primitive. There was no strong central government. Piracy was rife. In India itself, the English found at first apparently strong central government, that of the Mughal uh, emperor in Delhi. They only discovered gradually that uh, monolithic power of the peacock throne was illusory. During the early stages of the company's development of the Indian trade, the status of a purely commercial body operating on territory of the Delhi emperor and under his jurisdiction proved reasonably convenient when what's that guy? Aurangzeb died in
Yeah.
1707. The Mughal
Yeah.
Empire disintegrated rapidly, and the British were faced by a new and formidable responsibility. If we turn back to the early stages of North American colonization, we see that the English here had quite a different incentive and quite a different approach to the problem. They did not go to Virginia to trade, so as they did to India, they went there to found a new homeland for white men in a primitive, savage land. They went there from the first as rulers of newly occupied countries, but no other government existed, where no government existed. The Dutch, on the
Yes.
other hand, hmm?
Yeah, I was going to say that is a key part of like the I think a lot of people miss out is I'll just be very quick with this, but you had two aspects. You had traders and companies and traders which was sole purpose, like in India wasn't colonization, it was basically just trade with the existing civilized powers there. So the civilized, it would be the Islamic rulers or the Hindu rulers, or whatever, regional power that existed there. But in North America, they very much were aware that this was effectively, and I mean, yeah, you had your native tribes, but most of the land, especially on the eastern coast there of like Virginia, and everything, was large, was just unpopulated. There was nothing. You had great forests. You had, you know, it was just empty. And so the purpose of that wasn't, as he said, wasn't for trade. It was for basically creating extensions of England, which is ultimately what they did in Virginia and in Massachusetts with the Plymouth colony.
Okay. The Dutch, on the other hand, took an active part in the region where New York now stands, and at first their interest was primarily trading. They found in the Iroquois Indians, uh, the Five Nations, a political organization of unusual stability as compared with the rudimentary tribe regimes of most native communities in North America. Therefore, the outlooks and methods of English and Dutch were reversed as compared with their attitudes in Asia. France, from the very start of her career as an empire building nation, conducted her activities as a matter of state policy under fairly tightly centralized government control. Her dispatch of the of Jacques Cartier to St. Lawrence, her subsequent follow up by the explorers Chaplin, uh, La Salle, Joliet, and Marquette, and above all, her comparatively late but determined bid for possession of India. All these were government inspired and government backed moves in a deliberate and conscious plan for imperial aggrandizement. By the end of the 17th century and the commencement of the 18th century, the stage was set for a long and desperate struggle between England and France for the domination both of North America and England, or sorry, America and India. Spain and Portugal were fading out of these two arenas. Holland, after a brilliant start, was doomed to give up her North American ambitions and to restrict her Asiatic uh, one to Spice Islands. This was due to her instability to carve out, or inability to carve out, an overseas destiny while precariously saying her national independence amid the great continental wars of Europe. England and France alone were big enough and strong enough to endure the strain of continental wars and at the same time strike out for empires.
Right, that's it for chapter 2, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, so the next chapter is the struggle for North America. So that's more into from 1607 onwards, and I guess ultimately to the French Indian Wars and the British conquest of French Canada, and then sort of right up to I guess, the Revolution, the
Mm-hmm.
American Revolution. So, I mean, overall, what appears to have happened is you had like these very individual, regional, um, naval communities in England, places like in the West Country, and going out exploring, maybe even engaging and then you had like the more state-sponsored, uh, engaging in piracies in the West Indies, and I mean, I know Jamaica, for example, was pretty much taken over by the English, and it was about I forgot the name of the pirate, but he was awarded, I think it was by King James the First. He was like they said, "Oh, I'll make you governor." Yeah, as you capture it off the Spanish, or you're now governor of the island. So, yeah, I mean, it was very much like it was very disorganized. It wasn't centralized in London. There wasn't like I mean, even in the financial sector, there wasn't really much. Uh, I think the city of London was definitely instrumental in the exploration and the trading within India and in with the Mughals and the Hindu um, powers, but in North America, it seemed to be after the fact. The state involvement was something after the fact. But one thing that is quite interesting towards the end of this chapter is you had the English state at the time, because before the Act of Union, uh, or it became sort of quite clear that the more development, the more interest by the emergence of a like a centralized French positions in North America, the Dutch who would obviously go New Amsterdam and New York. I guess there was a more active attempt that we'll see a more active attempt by the British state to actually have the English state to have control over the colonies in North America, just because of the balance of power between the rivals there. Um,
Yeah, there's no real
and
empire yet.
no, it really isn't. It's more just like a collective of private companies, which they're only tied to their ties that they're chartered by the crown. So, I mean, I know for a lot of these companies, for example, that one of the largest shareholders would be the crown, the Duchy of Lancaster, what have you. So, that would be the tie. Uh, um, but yeah, I mean, it, what would develop? I mean, I know in New York, one of the would be the beaver pelts, which maybe I don't think Richard Hilton will mention, but that was I mean that was something that built New Amsterdam, New York up, was the pelt trade, and especially in Canada as well. Uh, but so and also at this particular time, as they said, was that uh, due to economic reasons as well, Spain was sort of in the declining stage. It wasn't, like it was towards Napoleon, the Napoleonic War period, where it really was a shadow for itself. But Spain and Portugal were. This is sort of a transition period where France, England, and Holland are in the ascendancy, and Spain and Portugal are sort of were sort of yesterday's news. I believe Jamaica was captured by the English during the Protectorate of Cromwell. Yeah, it could have been. Yeah. The only reason I remember that one was because I thought he was. It may have been Charles II, or um, after the fact, but yes, that could have been the case. I know that you had the Jamaica, um, Bahamas, and I mean there's still islands in the West Indies today which are still technically controlled by the British.
Hmm. Yeah.
So Yeah, I mean that sort of legacy still continues. But what do you have to your thoughts on that? Because it talked a lot about America and being someone from North America. Con, I mean, what do you make of the sort of because I get the feeling that you know the contemporaries at the time didn't really care about the North American continent. It was just about getting towards to the Asian markets. The continent was sort of like something in the way
Yeah,
for the
very
British.
secondary.
Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely interesting that it's mostly adventure that starts up interest in North America or beyond. It's sort of because the Spanish would have probably eventually gotten to it if the English hadn't started. But then again, the Spanish were very slow moving, anyways. At least in colonization, they didn't really. I mean, to some degree, their colonization looked more like uh, I don't know, finding wealth as well as sort of creating a society of natives and Spaniards. Very.
yeah. I remember Bronze Age pervert of all people was talking about the conquistadors, and one thing we forget, Connor, is when they arrived, first with Cortez, and then I think it was his what was it, Pizarro, or the one that conquered
Francis,
the
yeah,
Incas later on.
Francisco
Uh,
Pizarro, I think.
Pizarro, yeah, that's right. The Incas, and you had another chap who took on the Mayans. I mean, these weren't like the tribes of North America. These were civilizations. I mean, these were like city building societies. These were empires. These were, these weren't, um, you know, sticks and hut building societies of North America. These were proper societies and civilizations, and which had like the Aztecs had huge, according to the time, they had huge military forces, and the Incas had huge, and then like I mean Pizarro, I mean when he went into the Inca Empire, I think it was like 400 men. And the thing the thing there was it was it, I think and the thing there is like Bap said, at that time, because it was a time of adventure, it was the time period, it created you could conquer the world with a few exceptional men, and these sorts of men who you just they don't exist any today. But these men were probably the most fiercest, most violent, the most fanatical, and people of their own group, and um, you, I mean, I don't always view fanaticism as a bad thing, because if you're fanatical about something, it's like a complete devotion. So their whole like life and presence is devoted to X, and um, the religious motivation. I know a lot of modern individuals would sort of look at the Catholic, um, the conversion of the Mexicans and the Latin, the South American natives, as like sort of a Machiavellian move by Spanish and everything, to keep the natives in check while they exploit the land and everything. But in reality, I think the the need for conversion was actually something deep built into the psyche of the Spanish, the Iberian people, um, especially if you ever read the accounts of Cortez when he's in Techulana, or Mexico City as it is today, and he ascends the famous pyramid, which was filled with skulls, and then we can all joke. We joked about like the human sacrifice aspect, but
Mhm.
um, if you just think about it, at that time, they walk into this temple, in their mind a pagan temple, which is unheard of, because there's no Western European person that's seen an active pagan temple. They've never seen, they may have heard about it in stories and stuff, but legends, but this was a real temple, and they are seeing icons of these Aztec gods, which are devoted to human sacrifice. And you have blood stains, and you have mountains of corpses of captured natives from outside of the Aztec Empire. I mean, no wonder I mean, that was what was driving their religious fever to establish, Catholic supremacy.
I mean,
That was probably the single.
Barbaric nature of those Indian tribes were, horrific, and so it's not surprising that people were like, we need to stop this.
Well, no, I mean, and of course it resulted. I believe it resulted in that particular encounter. I think Montezuma was captured, the emperor of the Aztecs. He was captured, and Cortez basically said, "That's it. We're turning this temple into a Christian cathedral or something like that." So, yeah, there was, but it resulted in a revolt, and the subsequent retreat and then conquest of the Aztec Empire. But yeah, I mean, that sort of. But the thing is, I would actually say, if the Protestant English came across that, let's just say they came across like Aztec temples, because if you deal with, because the Spanish dealt with like pagan tribes where they may do like, worship animals, phantoms of animals, or what have you. But if the English or any Protestants came across these Aztec temples, do you think they would behave differently? Because I think they may have even behaved in a similar way.
I'm not sure. That's interesting. It seemed like the interest of those peoples were just mainly commercial. So I don't know if they would have been like
Well,
done the same thing, because like it would be one thing if sort of like if England had some form of conquistadors, because like they
I mean,
weren't. Hmm?
I would say that Cortez, he arrived in Mexico against the wishes of the Spanish crown, against the wishes of the governor of Havana. He was seen as an outlaw near enough. He burnt the ships to prevent
People
them returning.
Yeah.
Yeah, returning. And also he set up, I mean, I would say originally, because originally he wanted to set up the colony, which was Veracruz, which is what is Spanish, a true cross. He set up his colony in Mexico. But I don't think his original plan was the conquest of the Aztecs. Or even, I mean, it was to make contact with them. I don't even know if his original goal was to even convert them, until he saw the capital and saw what, and he would have heard from native tribes, oh, there's this Aztec empire, because when he first arrived, a lot of the natives that were around him were very friendly, because they thought that he would help them, which he obviously did in the end, against the Aztecs. But they were, uh, I don't know if, they were sort of, that situation was thrust upon them, and I just wonder, because the reason I use that example is when the East India Company, when they were expanding into the Hindu regions, and you had like people like Napier, when they saw Hindus, the bride burning and various other, what they would describe as pagan practices, they put up like these sort of uh, these platforms for hanging. These build like these for hanging. Said right, first person who burns their bride will hang. And basically said we're establishing now he was a Protestant, but he said we're establishing Christian principles. So that's why I do question it, because I do think the Protestants of that time, they wouldn't have just gone, oh well, as long as GDP figures work out, carry on, carry on, guys. I don't think that would have. I think they probably would have reacted in the same way. It was just that the Protestants went into a region of North America which wasn't populated significantly, and they just set up colonies, and they were more interested of like just developing land, building land, farming, and collecting. There wasn't really, because I mean I'm absolutely honest that I think in history, especially in American history, the size of the Native American tribes are quite greatly overestimated. Do you agree with that, Connor? That there's somewhat, because a lot of like the modern day native activists say, "Oh yeah, the white man came in, they took all the land." It's like, yeah, but what percentage of the land did your tribe actually use, like sit on and use?
Yeah, I
Because it
mean
wasn't that great, was it?
they weren't that advanced, so it would, I don't know, it wouldn't have been as widely populated um, as something like Europe, of course. So yeah, and I would just have to think more about what that alternative history would look like. That it might be an AM answer. AM might have to answer that kind of question.
Yeah, I mean that actually would be a good question to pose to him, because I like to know, if say Anglicans or the Dutch, the Calvinist or Lutherans, if they were to, if or like say German Lutherans, if they were to come across Aztec, let's just say like a Lutheran army, and they came across an Aztec temple, in that sort of position, how do you think they would react? Do you think they would be, same as Spanish, but
Or even this,
yeah,
like this question for him would be, what if, what would happen? What would be the results of basically the uh, the different nations swapping their what land, what colonies they actually got. So you switch the English with the Spanish. So suddenly the Spanish or the English have conquered or colonized uh, South America and Central America, and and then the Spanish instead colonized the 13 colonies or something like that. Like what would that look like? What would
yeah.
the effects
I
be?
mean, I know in India, during the early years of the East India Company, it wasn't all, because it wasn't organized directly by the state. The government didn't have the resources within the company itself. That there was originally uh, attempts to convert especially the Hindu population to Christianity, and you did have like, I mean, there was a region. Connor, if you can find, I don't know if you, I'll try and find it later on, but there is like areas in India. There's like one province in India which is like majority Presbyterian. It's like 97% Presbyterian, like one of the states. um, so there was like uh, there was attempts, but it was ultimately stopped because of the revolts and you know various agreements made by the Maharajas on that to stop conversions. Um, but I mean, there I mean, one thing that I've always been interested in is like the missionary work in England, places like India, like Africa, North America, and during the British Empire, but also what sort of relationship had with the state. And I do have to remind myself and others that you have to remember the Anglican Church was and is still today, technically part of the state. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
True. Yeah, I think we'll get into a lot more of these, ideas in the next one, especially
Yeah,
or
I mean
in the
the,
further ones, because I mean, the first two chapters are mainly just setting up what's going to happen everywhere else, in the other places.
yeah, I mean the fourth chapter is the American independence, and yeah, it just goes on. I
Like
mean we're
this
sort of
hasn't been exactly like linear. These two chapters haven't been entirely linear. They've kind of bounced around time wise.
yeah, and I think he's sort of setting up the concept of the fall, like because I think what's quite interesting is I know that Richard Hilton ultimately he looks towards America and sort of say, well, I mean, America is sort of the reason the empire falls, and I think I think he gets into the Suez crisis and the Persian Gulf oil trading and everything, which sort of plays a hands in that. So that would be quite interesting because I mean it's I think also he'll reference the 1812 war, which is that would definitely be because one thing I didn't know is a lot of Americans view that as a war they won. Do you know that about that, Connor? That the 1812 war is sort of viewed by a lot of Americans as, oh, that yeah, we won that war against the British.
I've always thought of
That's
it as
fa-
a draw, but that's that sort of a just principally not gaining any land, not losing any land, principally a draw. But I understand why some people think. Well, some people think that the British had the best army in the entire world, and that the that the revolutionaries beat the biggest, the most powerful army in the world, which is utterly ridiculous.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that's what like a I grew up watching documentaries on the History Channel, and that's the stuff they tell you.
yeah. I mean, when I was in school, the limit that we were taught about, because I imagine you, I mean, you were probably taught about the American Revolution without a doubt, and
Hmm.
when you were at school. I mean, at school we were taught that basically what happened was the Americans, the colonists in the 13 colonies revolted. They declared independence. The states declared independence. So what happened was the government institutions effectively that were there just effectively overnight switched, became declared independent, and then the British Army, as you know, they sailed across the ocean, bombarded New York, captured like Charlestown in the south, and you had these two armies, one in the north, one in the south, to regain control. But what was sort of the problem was the it wasn't like the Americans, because I think it sort of gives the false impression, oh, the Americans rose up and overthrew the British army that was already there. That there wasn't really a British army presence there. They had to come over the Atlantic to try and reassert dominance. But by then it was sort of too late at that point because the American patriots were quite well um, entrenched in in Philadelphia, in Boston, in New York.
I think it's more just the internal politics between the Whigs and the Tories really got in the way.
Yeah, and I mean, what was amazing was like New Jersey was very pro-British even towards the end of the Revolutionary Wars.
So I think the governments of Virginia, Boston, or not Boston, Massachusetts, um, and this I can't remember all of them, but a number of them were uh, pro uh, pro British, but they were sort of terrorized out.
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading about in like Pennsylvania, you had lynchings of British uh, effectively like civil servants, you know, just random killings, like
Oh yeah.
2020 BLM style, you know. mobs. I'm not even joking. It's
No, I know we
literally,
haven't really changed much.
yeah. It was like 2020 BLM style lynching.
But you
Um,
guys freed the slaves to fight to try and defeat us.
yeah. I mean, that was sort of a last sort of ditch attempt to
I think that
uh
was Virginia. That happened in Virginia.
yeah, Virginia, the Carolinas, and I mean they could only well, actually, to correct you a bit there, they were only allowed their freedom if they fought in the British Empire, in the British Army.
Oh,
They
yeah,
couldn't
I
just
know.
we didn't just say, oh, you're free now. Now you can join up if you want to. That's not how it works.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, 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 boy. That's not how it works here. Um,
Yeah, of course. Why would you free them if they weren't going to support you like that? Otherwise, you know, they weren't going to be
yeah.
freed.
I
But
mean, one Tory militiaman that is um, Rogers Rangers. They're quite a famous one in many historians who talk about the and you had Roger himself. He was like a prop. I think he was like either Irish or Scottish, and he was like a frontiers guy. Incredibly ruthless. His unit
mm.
really effective, hunting down patriots and um,
Well, I'm looking forward to
yeah,
uh our future discussions on this. But
yeah.
we
But
have
I
been
mean,
talking for like how long?
2 hours and
2 hours.
yeah, 2 hours. So to summarize, I'll just summarize quickly on my point. I think it's setting up quite interesting. It's sort of setting how, by queer coincidence, the English sort of inherit these inherit these lands which would they've worked to develop in, and at the same time they're building up a sort of trading wealth in the Indian subcontinent. But at the same time, you have in both continents, North America and India, you've got the rivalry between the Dutch and the French. I think in the next chapter, ultimately, the English slash British, because the Act of Union will prevail against the Dutch and then against the French. And you'll start. I think in the next chapter you'll start to see the formation of what we know to be the British Empire. Connor? Have you got anything to add on that point?
Yeah, I just think it's definitely a preparatory chapter. You know, it's really just setting things up, and I'm excited to get into sort of the meat and potatoes of everything.
Yeah, same, same. Anyway, thank you for coming on, Connor, and thanks for everyone in chat. Thanks, Alice and uh, uh, Iron Duke and Mediocre, the Unremarkable, and anyone else in North Sea who was there at the beginning. Thanks for everyone, and I will see you all next time.